Good morning, friends. Thank you for joining us today for our last workshop this semester in Luther College's Growing Nonprofit Leaders series. We're very grateful for the South Saskatchewan Community Foundation for sponsoring these sessions. I'm joining you today from my office in Regina, located in Treaty 4 territory on the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota First Nations and the homeland of the Métis. As some of you may know, earlier this year, Louis Riel was officially recognized as Manitoba's first premier. And the only reason I mention this today is because early in both of our careers, I had the great honor of working with our guest speaker, Shelley Fant. Shelley is a member of the Peepeekisis Cree Nation, but also has close kinship ties to the Qu'Appelle Valley Michif community. Now, Shelley, I was cleaning out our basement the other day and I found this. It's the award we got from the International Association of Business Communicators for the fundraiser that we worked on to save the trial of Louis Riel. The city of Regina had slashed funding to community-based organizations, and the theater company that hosted the trial of Louis Riel announced that the funding cuts meant that 1999, oh my God, that's a long time ago, Shelley, would be their last season. I'm still so proud of the fundraiser that Shelley and I worked so hard on with Tourism Regina. This event raised enough money and community awareness that not only did the trial of Louis Riel survive, but it has thrived. And this summer, it celebrated its 58th year and remains the longest continuously running historical drama in North America. So there you go, your trivia for the day. But gosh, Shelley, that means that we're getting old, because that was like almost 25 years ago, and most of the students in my class this semester aren't even that old. So anyhow, Shelley is a true pro in almost every facet of communications, including event planning. But she recently made a leap from communications to the grant-making world and is currently an outreach consultant with SaskCulture. Now, Shelley was one of the first people that came to my mind when I was planning speakers for this nonprofit communications class in this series that everyone's joining us with. She could speak on almost any facet of organizational communications, so I left it up to her to suggest a topic. And I know many of us are trying to make our own contributions through the work we do with the organizations that we work with to practice truth and reconciliation. So I know what Shelley's going to be sharing with us will be immensely helpful. So please help me in welcoming Shelley Fant, my good friend and someone I truly admire, as she shares some of her personal and professional experiences that have helped SaskCulture advance its truth and reconciliation journey. Shelley will take questions at the end of the hour, and like we've done in past sessions, we'll head into breakout rooms for the final part of the session.
Well, Tansei, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lynn, for that kind introduction and for really kind of reminding me of how long I've been kicking around in the communications work sector here in Saskatchewan. And thank you for inviting me to join your class today to share my personal and work experiences and journey practicing truth and reconciliation. I too am joining you from my home office in Regina, situated here in Treaty 4 territory. So there may be an occasional cat strolling by or the furnace kicking on. So I apologize for any disruptions that you may notice. As I was working on this presentation, we got the sad news that Murray Sinclair had passed away. And I had to really stop to reflect on his work with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and the profound impact that it had on my life, both personally as a First Nations person and professionally. And I hope what I share with you today honors his work and his legacy and inspires you to either begin or to continue your own truth and reconciliation journeys. I've taken to using the word practicing when it comes to my own journey, mostly because I recognize that I'm still finding my way in this truth and reconciliation process, the pathway that we're on, and I recognize the rest of Canada is as well. So, and I know that none of us know exactly how how to get to where we need to be. So throughout all of this, keep in mind that this is a journey. We're going to make mistakes, take wrong turns, possibly even have setbacks. But as long as we continue to practice truth and reconciliation, we will learn from it together and hopefully move forward together as well. So Lynn, provided some background about me. Awina Nia, who am I? I'm a Cree Treaty Indian and a member of the Beeksys Cree Nation, which is about an hour northeast here of Regina. And through my husband, George, I have close kinship with the Qu'Appelle Valley Michif community. And we've lived in Regina for 30 years. We've raised our family here. I did use the word Indian because that's how I am recognized. My status is recognized federally through the Indian Act. And that status comes from my maternal side of the family. The McLeod, the Denemy, and the Brass families of Vial Hills. I'm not close to my paternal side of the family, but I also have Métis and Ukrainian heritage through my biological father's side of the family. So that top slide that you're seeing, this image is from a photograph that actually hangs on a wall at SaskCulture. It's taken from, it says Indian Chiefs Libret Pageant, August 15th, 1925. And what's funny about this is that I didn't even notice it in our office for about a year and a half into my work at SaskCulture. It's in a part of the office that I rarely visited. And, it was kind of a surprise to me when I did encounter it. And it actually features one of my ancestors. So the little red arrow there is pointing to my Chepan, which is my great-great-grandfather in Cree, Squatum, or he was more commonly known as the Flag. And Squatum, or Flag, was actually at the side of our chief, who was the original signator to Treaty 4, Chief Kanahat Chapeo, which means ready the bow, ready's the bow. And so it was really kind of a cool experience to find this photo in our office. And, I just took it as a sign that my ancestors are always with me, even when I'm unaware or I don't notice. And the background of my Zoom profile picture is also a photo that I love because it reminds me that my ancestors have my back. And it's actually a Christy Belcourt painting. And again, I just take strength and pride from knowing that who my ancestors are and everything that we've endured and our resilience as First Nations and Métis people. So I am so blessed to have grown up surrounded by family and community. And the older I get and the more I understand about government policy and the experiences we've had as First Nations and Métis people, the more I realize this privilege. Because I do come from a multi-generational family of residential school survivors. 4 generations of my family, so that would be nearly everyone before me, from my great-great-grandparents to my great-grandparents, my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my mother, including my 2 older brothers, were institutionalized at the Qu'Appelle Indian Residential School in Libret. And that's the second photo in the slide there. That's the building as I remember it. I am among the first in my family to not have been institutionalized there. And yet all of us still bear remnants of that experience, emotional, spiritual, and physical scars in some cases from it. So just to give you a very brief example of my family's experience there, my great-grandpa, his name was Henry, we called him Grandpa McLeod, actually had his arm amputated at this school when he was a student. These schools were called schools, but they were institutions with a heavy focus on Christianizing the students who attended there. and also preparing them to be either farm laborers or domestic help. So their days were really comprised of prayer, a little bit of studying, and then working in various capacities to be of service or to be useful once they got out of residential school. So my great grandpa had his arm amputated. Fast forward a generation, his daughter, my kokum, Florence, my mother's mother, had all her fingers amputated on her right hand, working in the laundry room as a young girl. So that's just my family's experience. Residential schools were in existence for more than 150 years throughout Canada, and more than 150,000 children were forced into these institutions over that time. So just to give you a little bit of context. So that bottom image is, the residential school in Loretto as I remember it. And I actually spent a fair bit of time there, even though I never was forced to attend there. But I spent a lot of time with my grandmother who lived in Loretto, and she worked at this school. She was a matron. Basically, her role was overseeing the health and well-being of students. My mother also worked there later on. She was a childcare worker for junior girls. My older brother worked in the kitchen, and I had other relatives as well who worked in various capacities throughout the time that the school was still in operation. And I didn't question their involvement a lot when I was younger. But again, as you get older, you get more reflective and we learn more, as more and more people share truths. I really wondered why they would choose to work there. I mean, this is essentially ground zero, really, for so much of my family's pain and trauma. But I do understand now that they wanted to try to make a difference, right? So to try to change things from the inside. And as somebody who worked in government for many years, I totally get that now. And you know what? And they did make a difference. My mom is still in touch with many of the students she cared for there through the power of Facebook. And, they still tell her how grateful they are for the care and love that she provided while they were away from their homes and their families and communities. I'll point out at the time my mother worked there, the school was already, the government, the federal government and the church had already turned back operations of the school or given operations over to a First Nation. So it was First Nations controlled and run by the time my mom was an employee there. So a little bit more about me. I'm a mom to 3 adult children. I'm a kokum, I'm an auntie, and these are roles that I love and I take very, very seriously. I take them to heart. I'm so blessed that my brother and my sister auntie share their grandchildren with me. That's part of our Cree culture and custom. So while my children don't have their own children, I get to spoil and love up these other little people in my life. And spending time with them is one of my most favorite things to do in the world, because seeing their joy and their happiness and their complete freedom to be who they are meant to be without any of that shame that was instilled in my family because of our experience at residential school heals me in ways I never even knew I needed healing. So I spend as much time as I can with these people in my life. I built my career in communications over 25 years. As Lynn pointed out, we've known each other for quite a while. Working in a variety of places, the provincial government, the casino, which is where Lynn and I met, First Nations organizations, film industry, and then all of that before landing here at SaskCulture. And for those of you who may not know, SaskCulture is a nonprofit, volunteer-driven provincial cultural organization that offers programs to distribute Sask Lottery's funding, which comes in through the sale of lottery tickets, to nurture cultural engagement in the province. And I've been here now for 9 years. I worked for 7 years in the communications area before jumping over to the program side of things, and it'll be 2 years coming up in this role pretty quickly. And I oversee, or I run 2 grant programs here, the Aboriginal Arts and Cultural Leadership program and the Multicultural Initiatives Project grants. And, switching careers at this stage of my life has been really challenging, but also incredibly rewarding because I get to help others strengthen, support, celebrate, and share their own cultures. And this is something that resonates deeply with me, given my own family and community's experience as First Nations, where we had our languages, our cultures, our traditions, our ceremonies, and our connection to the land disrupted by government policy and actions. And we're still trying to reclaim that after all these years. So I've always been really proud of my identity as a First Nations person. My mom tells a story about me from when I was about 5 years old. We lived in Prince Albert, which is where I was born. And at the time, my best friend was this little redhead girl named Marianne. Her family was British, like right over from England. Her mom and her grandma, who lived with them, even had that proper English accent. And I thought it was hilarious as a child because I had never encountered anybody else except for my family, my friends. And I remember asking them, like, why do you talk like that? And they were really proud to tell me about England, where they were from. And I had no concept of England. I mean, the only thing I really understood at that age was that was where the Queen lived. And the only reason I kind of knew about the Queen, and some older folks will remember this, but at that time we had to sing God Save the Queen every morning, standing up by our desks in our classroom. And so that was kind of the only frame of reference that I had. And then they asked me about where I was from. And I said, right here, I'm an Indian. This is our land. And at the time, my mom was working at what is now called the Federation of Sovereign and Indigenous Nations, the FSIN. And so I was surrounded at that time in my life by really powerful leaders like Saul Sanderson and Doug Cuthand. And it was a really important and pivotal time in the organization of First Nations politics and treaty advocacy in this province. And so that's what I told them. And I obviously didn't really understand what that meant, but it was the truth as I knew it. And I can still remember the shock on their faces. And my little friend Marianne blurted out, but you can't be an Indian. I'm not allowed to play with Indians. And I got really upset and, she didn't believe me. So I dragged her, down the block to my house. And my mom says she remembers me bursting in the door with Marianne right behind me and yelling, Mom, we're Indians, right? And she kind of laughed. She said, well, yeah, of course we are. And then me and Marianne ran back to her place so that we could tell her family that, yes, indeed, Shelley is an Indian. And I remember the confusion, like on their faces, and, didn't really think too much about it. But I think I understand now because my mom was a single mom in, this is the 70s in Prince Albert, but she had a really good job. And so we had a brand new car and we lived in a really nice house. Marianne and her family lived in an apartment. I had nice toys, I had nice clothes. We didn't fit into whatever category that Marianne and her family believed we should be in as Indians. But we weren't allowed to play together after that. And I was devastated. She'd been my best friend, for what seemed like a long time when you're 5 years old. And I remember thinking maybe I shouldn't have said anything, that maybe we could still be friends if I hadn't told them I was an Indian. That's a hard lesson to learn as a kid. And I think I carried, that with me, and I learned to be a lot less open after that experience. I know I certainly carried that through in my career. And it was an approach that I kind of used in my career. I would share my insights and perspectives and knowledge about my culture, but only when asked and only in relatively safe ways. And I'm glad Lynn referenced our work together on the trial of Louis Riel, because that was, one of the experiences I can say early in my career that was a very good experience. And after all these years, I'm still so grateful to Lynn and her leadership at that time for allowing me to really tap into who I was as an Indigenous person and to work with First Nations and Métis people in ways that I knew needed to be done in order to build that trust and that relationship. So thank you again, Lynn. And I'll just throw it out there. We actually won 2 awards for that project at that time. But anyway, early on in my work life, I was always very careful so as to not be accused of playing the race card or or being difficult, because unfortunately that is something that women of color in workplaces come up against. So my philosophy very much became about choosing my battles, right? I invested my time and energy where and when I thought it was worthwhile. And when it wasn't, I left jobs and moved on. If you were to take a peek at my CV, you would think, holy, this woman can't seem to hold down a job. And this is actually something someone said to me once. So from there, using my communications expertise, I started crafting really careful messaging for job interviews. When questioned about that, and just saying, I'm gaining as much experience for my resume as possible and for career advancement. Then I came to SaskCulture, and it was different for me right from the start. So I joined the team in the fall of 2015, and this was shortly after the release of the Truth and Reconciliation of Canada, Commission of Canada's release of the final report and the 94 calls to action. And when I came on board, staff had already read the final report and the calls to action together as a team. And they were already in the process of discussing how to implement applicable calls to action to the work that they do. So these images on this slide are from Engage, which is a SaskCulture publication that we put out a few times a year to share stories of projects that have been supported through our grant programs, also highlighting some of the other work that we do. And this issue is from the winter of 2015. And it responds to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. And it really signals to the cultural community the beginning of SaskCulture's TRC journey. This particular issue of the magazine is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. The first image on the left is there's a CEO message at the beginning of every one of these magazines. And this one, the first image is the joint introduction by our former CEO, Rose Gilks, and my colleague, Damon Badger Height, who incidentally has played an enormous role in SaskCulture relationship building with First Nations and Métis people and organizations and communities. But this is really cool to me as a new staff person and as a communications professional, because it was centering the voice and the experience and the leadership of a First Nations person. As Lynn can probably attest, there are many leaders, particularly in the political realm, who don't often share the limelight, and especially with First Nations staff. So I thought that was really cool. So this issue was already well underway when I came on board. So I did have a role. I wrote a couple of stories for it, but I was really immersed in learning my job, getting to know my coworkers, just figuring out the lay of the land, right? And so right before this issue went to print, literally it was going out the door, I was asked to give it a final proofread. And I spotted something that just really didn't sit right with me. So the image on the right is from a story from that particular issue. And it's a story about a project that was supported through SaskCulture, a film that shared the story of the Regina Indian Industrial School. And it was a very emotional and sad story. And so when I was proofreading the magazine, just before it went out to print, there was this ad right there in the corner of the page where the orange box is now that says Truth and Reconciliation. And the ad was promoting Creative Kids, which is a children's charity that SaskCulture runs to provide children and youth with opportunities to participate in creative activities regardless of economic barriers. And it's a really important charity, by the way, so please let me know if anybody would like more information about how to support it. But anyway, the ad featured a happy, smiling child, and it used the Creative Kids branding, which is really vibrant and colorful and happy. And given where it was placed in the context of the story, it was so inappropriate. And you know what? I had this enormous inner battle with myself about whether or not to flag it because I knew it would delay the production process. And when you disrupt that schedule, it means that it's late out the door to subscribers. There's usually an additional cost. And moreover, I also risked becoming that person, like right off the hop. And my heart told me it was wrong. But unfortunately, I chose to ignore it because I was still so new. I hadn't even passed probation yet. My organization and my coworkers didn't know me yet. And I didn't want to be causing problems so fresh into this job. So the magazine went to print on time and on budget. But when it came back from the printer, the ad was just so obviously out of place with the context of that story, and somebody else in the organization actually pointed it out. And so it was brought back to me, and I was asked my honest opinion. Did this bother you? Does this bother you? And I had to admit, yes, I noticed it, but I chose not to say anything. I don't know what I was expecting to happen, but there was no finger pointing or defensiveness or any other negative reaction. Instead, a plan was devised, like right away, to cover that ad with the sticker that you see there now, which is messaging more appropriate to the story that the original ad was placed in. And we hand placed that sticker on the 1,200 copies of this magazine before it got sent out the door to the subscribers. So this was a really early lesson at SaskCulture for me about truth telling, and it helped shape my own personal call to action in my workplace going forward. So the next couple of years, the blur of activity, there were incredible learning opportunities to continue to understand SaskCulture's role and responsibilities in truth and reconciliation, and how the work that we do could help support our network's growth and understanding of why this is so important. We sat with and learned from Eugene Arcand, for example. He's a very respected leader and key figure with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Survivor Circle. And what they do is they guide the work of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. And Eugene shared his residential school experience and described how he had repressed it for many years, with detrimental impacts on his family, his relationships, his community, his children, and his own well-being. He really emphasized that his healing journey would be lifelong, but that sharing his story was central to that journey. And that message was profound to me. Again, the truth will set you free. So we developed our own personal call to action that day as a staff, with guidance from Eugene, as well as Zoe Roy, who's this fantastic young First Nations woman who just has a real knack. She's just a beautiful spirit. And they guided us through ways to formalize our own personal calls to action that day. And that's what I did. My call to action would be that I would always speak my truth as a First Nations person, even when it terrified me. And that experience with the Engage magazine was like central in my mind when I made that commitment to myself. And so I began sharing more of my own and my family's experiences, even though a lot of it hadn't even been discussed in our family as, my extended family yet. And SaskCulture continued to invest in other powerful learning opportunities for staff, board, and our cultural network. Many of us attended the annual Wichihidawin conference in Saskatoon, which was an annual residential school survivors gathering, which just completely powerful, emotional experience where, I still reflect on what I learned there. I personally, through my work at SaskCulture, have had the privilege of being able to listen and learn from firsthand from all three of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada commissioners, the late Honorable Marie Sinclair, Dr. Marie Wilson, and Chief Wilton Littlechild at various times. Some of the staff participated in the Rock Your Roots walk for National Indigenous Peoples Day in Saskatoon. The photo there on the top left is me and some of my colleagues. What you don't see is that there were about 7,000 other people who participated in that walk, which was just an amazing feeling to be with so many people who, you know, are on the same walk. We had a keynote presentation at one of our AGMs with Lyndon Linklater from the Speakers Bureau at the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. That's him in this slide in the yellow. We participated, offered to our network a workshop on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and countless opportunities to sit with and learn from elders and knowledge keepers, to be guided from their wisdom and experience. So the bottom slide refers to a project in 2017 that I was so privileged to be the communications point person for. It's called the Resilience and Respect 150 and Beyond project. And this was a project funded by Canadian Heritage, and it was intended to be an initiative to support Canada 150 celebrations during, I think it was called the Centennial. I can't say it. I'll just say Canada 150. And SaskCulture's approach was to use the opportunity to partner with several Indigenous cultural organizations in the province to give them the opportunity to respond to Canada's 150 on their own terms and in their own ways. And then we would use our internal capacity and resources to handle the administrative work involved with that grant, and just giving them the opportunity to focus exclusively on how they wanted to respond. The logo, which is the bottom image there, was created by an incredibly talented Dene graphic designer named Megan Curry, and it was developed in partnership with those organizations whose logos are on the bottom there. And I still love this logo so much because there are some little subversive messages that were built into the design, and while still conforming to all the requirements of our contribution agreement with Canadian Heritage. So for instance, the red arrow that runs through the project title, you'll see that it starts out on the left before Canada 150 logo with a bold and robust red arrow. And that symbolizes the health and vitality of the Indigenous nations in this land before Canada came along and colonization. And then there's this disruption in the middle with Canada. That's the formation of Canada and really the beginning of colonization on First Nations and Métis people. And then those little black dots that you see after Canada, that represents the disruption and the division that was caused. And it carries through, the 150 there. But on the right side, you'll see the tip of the arrow is becoming red again. And this is meant to represent the strength and the healing in our nations as we work to reclaim our inherent rights, our languages, our cultures, and our traditions. So that was one kind of little subversive message that we were able to put into this Canada 150 initiative. We also insisted that the logo had to be translated into Indigenous languages, and that was in response to government guidelines for any federal programs that insist it needs to be bilingual, French and English. And our partners really kind of bristled at that. So what we did is we got the title translated into those Indigenous languages that you like Cree, Michif, Dakota, Anishinaabe, and Dene. And we engaged language speakers for that, and we paid them honoraria for their help with this. And, it was really important that the distinct languages of this part of the world was purposely included and represented. We kept the translation specific to the concept of resilience and respect and omitted the Canada 150 and beyond from these translations. And it was not just an effort to save space, but also to avoid having to indigenize the 150 theme. Just to really emphasize that these ideas, resilience and respect, are without a beginning and without an end. It's a forever and always kind of idea without timelines or time frames or linear thinking, which are really colonial concepts. was a really successful initiative that delivered important and impactful programming that highlighted the resilience of First Nations and Métis peoples, cultures, and languages. And it also helps SaskCulture build and strengthen our relationship with those Indigenous cultural organizations. This work and these opportunities were unlike any other I'd ever experienced before in my career. And though the work was challenging, personal, and on an emotional level that I'd never before experienced, I began to believe that I finally found my place in organizational communications. But then came 2018, and with it a watershed moment that really defined truth and reconciliation for me and for SaskCulture. In February 2018, Gerald Stanley was acquitted for killing Colton Bushey, a young Cree man from the Red Pheasant First Nation. The verdict came on a Friday night, and I can't overstate the impact that this had on First Nations and Métis people. It was a really bad weekend for me and for many others. I came into work on the Monday, and because of my experience at SaskCulture to that point, I believed that there would be an opportunity to discuss this with my colleagues, unpack some of the heaviness that I carried all weekend, and get reassurance that our TRC work was more important than ever. Because that was what our previous work was kind of centered around, and I hope that others would help lift this burden. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. Due to timing, there was a board meeting that weekend. So as the usual practices, people had the Monday off. And it really felt like there was a pall in the office that day. There were 3 of us at that time who were First Nations on staff. And so we got together and we talked about it and shared, our reactions, our feelings, and we supported each other through the morning. But, nobody else kind of seemed to understand the impact. And so all 3 of us ended up leaving by noon that day. I chose to join others who in my community who I knew were feeling the same way. And, we ended up at the legislature that day to express our collective shock and our grief and our sorrow and our frustration, our anger. This image is actually from the following weekend when there were more protests and rallies from the community about the verdict. I'm there with my cousin Memory, and I get emotional even looking at this because it still weighs heavily on my heart. But the next day was our regular staff meeting, and the verdict was actually on our agenda. We have time during our staff meetings where we do an environmental scan. We talk about relevant, timely topics that impact our work. This is pretty routine for SaskCulture. And that was kind of how the conversation opened up was, who has anything to share? And so a lot of my colleagues then spoke to it, but it was from a pretty high level and kind of related more to the work that we do. What wasn't routine was how I and my 2 colleagues reacted when it was our turn to speak. And I won't speak for them, but I can tell you that I had so much anger and disappointment and frustration pent up. It was like a dam burst open. I can't even remember my exact words, but I basically said that I felt tricked into believing that SaskCulture and my colleagues had any genuine interest in TRC and truth and reconciliation. I felt that none of the truths that I'd shared or that we'd heard in our time together was understood, and that the indifference that I felt from them about such a monumentally impactful incident absolutely changed how I perceived every one of them who was sitting around the board table looking at me. It changed how I felt about SaskCulture. And at the end of my tirade, I more or less made up my mind that it was time to move on again, because that's how strongly I felt about what happened. And I know that my fellow colleagues, my First Nations colleagues, words were also impactful, maybe even more so, because both of them had been with Sask Culture much longer than me. But I can say that it was one of the most emotional and uncomfortable meetings I've ever been in. What became painfully clear was that my non-Indigenous colleagues, to them, Colton's story was tragic, absolutely. The verdict was unfair. Many of them believed that, but it was just a story on the news. It didn't mean anything. It didn't impact their lives or them in any way. But to us, the First Nations people on staff, Colton was our relative. We saw our own sons, our brothers, our nephews, and even ourselves reflected in him. And we knew that if this could happen to him, it could happen to any one of us or our families. The rest of the meeting turned into like a sharing circle of sorts. And it's when I really came to understand and appreciate Maurice Sinclair's statement when he said, we have to learn how to talk to and about each other with greater respect than has been the case in the past. I had assumed that all of the training, learning, and sharing that we had done as a team had placed us all at the same point on this journey, that somehow we had found the key to TRC success. But it became clear that we had a long ways to go as an organization, and moreover as a country, that our truth and reconciliation work and walk together would be one of endurance. And there would be hurdles that would probably trip us up along the way, maybe knock the wind out of us, and maybe even set us back. But I had to decide in that moment if I was willing to pick myself up and help others regain their footing and begin the arduous task of moving forward together again. And to make a long story short, I decided it was worth the effort. It was an important learning for all of us at Sask Culture, and one that we continue to reflect on and grow from. So since then, there have been many other conversations and lessons and yes, mistakes. We also continue to make strides forward. In 2019, Sask Culture's constitution was amended to include recognition and commitment to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's principles of reconciliation, and also acknowledges the United Nations Declaration on the rights for Indigenous peoples and the calls to action. And this received full support of our board and our membership. And this slide just shows some of the other steps forward from the communications front that I was involved in. So with Sask Culture support and encouragement, when I was working on the Culture Days initiative as Saskatchewan's representative, I helped advise and guide the National Culture Days body to ensure that September 30th, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, is set aside solely for TRC events through Canada. And that's because the Culture Days initiative runs three weeks in the fall, and it spans that September 30th date. And, I felt it was really, really important that because it's Culture Days, it really needed to honor First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in this country and our cultures, and also to shine the spotlight on a national level on TRC. We have implemented a treaty acknowledgement on our website, which is the little blue box there. Non-Indigenous staff give personalized land acknowledgements in external meetings and events. We have built a dedicated area of our website where we include truth and reconciliation information to help create more awareness and understanding about First Nations and Métis people and communities. And just for context, I refer to First Nations and Métis people because that is the people of Saskatchewan, the original peoples. Nationally, of course, we would be including the Inuit. Another little thing that we did was our events calendar, which is on our website. It's a self-submitted form, so people can fill it out with their cultural or arts events, and then it'll appear on our events calendar. In the back end of the form, we built in a treaty territory field where people have to identify the treaty territory in which their event will take place. So small, but meaningful steps to acknowledge the original peoples and to get others thinking about their place and in their work for TRC and treaty knowledge. Organizationally, September 30th is a stat for SaskCulture staff so that we can take part in TRC activities and events to reflect and to learn. And so, SaskCulture continues to encourage and support staff in our respective journeys. Some of the other ways include, like, we've all done the Kairos blanket exercise as a team. This past weekend, we actually, with our board, also did cultural humility training, which is offered through the Aboriginal Friendship Centres of Saskatchewan. And other training opportunities. And we're now looking forward and planning to undertake trauma-informed and cultural sensitivity training together. So our truth and reconciliation journey is still very much underway 9 years later, and there's no end date in sight. We keep continuing to learn and unlearn, and that's a really important thing to acknowledge. Many of us went through the school system and at a time where treaty and First Nations and Métis just weren't part of the curriculum. We were still learning Canada's history. And as we know now, that isn't always a lot of it. It was not accurate. It left a lot of information out. So continuing to learn and unlearn, move forward a few steps before getting knocked backwards again. And we advocate for change through our work, and we continue to practice truth and reconciliation together as a staff. And this hasn't been easy for anyone. The work is still incredibly difficult for me, even after all this time of practicing. So one last story I'm going to share, a personal story. When the TRC Commission was gathering testimonies of survivors, many of my family members participated, but I didn't. I refused to because I didn't think I had any right to participate because I didn't go to residential school. And I didn't want to take away in any way from the experiences of the survivors in my family, my mom and my kokum, my aunties, uncles. So Lyndon Linklater, who I mentioned earlier, who was a keynote speaker at our annual general meeting, early on when I joined SaskCulture, and something he said there has stuck with me all these years. He likened the intergenerational residential school experience to that of, people who get cancer from secondhand smoke. He drew the comparison that while the victims in both scenarios were not directly involved in what happened, the impacts were equally harmful. And so I've reflected on that many times since then, understanding, how profound that statement was. And so I understand now that I do have a responsibility to share me and my family's experiences so that people will understand and learn from it, especially as we lose more and more of our residential school survivors. It's emotional work, and it can be incredibly triggering. Especially as I continue to work on my own personal reconciliation, with my family, my community, in my workplace, the church, and frankly, with all of Canada. But one thing I've learned is that growth comes from discomfort. And I can honestly say that I've learned more about myself in this role than in any other non-Indigenous workplace that I've been in. And while the work is challenging and difficult and uncomfortable, having others along on the journey with me has made all the difference. And on that note, one last thing to mention, not everybody is going to be ready or willing to walk with you on this journey. In fact, the prevailing sentiment among a lot of First Nations and Métis folks is that the heavy lifting involved with this work is not ours to bear. We've done our part by sharing our truth And now it's up to Canada and to individuals and workplaces to figure out the reconciliation part. So reflect on that and honor that when you encounter it. So just some parting thoughts. If you haven't read and familiarized yourself with the 94 calls to action, do that. That's the beginning. That's the bare minimum. And then from there, identify your own professional and personal calls to action. A lot of people get overwhelmed. Like there's 94 calls to action, and they were directed at government, federal government, provincial governments, municipal government, and sectors, the business sector, education sector. But there are calls to action that you could take and adapt it for your own journey. And it doesn't have to be all 94 of them. Find one that resonates with you, one or two, and then figure it out how to move forward with those calls to action in mind, and think about how you can contribute to your and your family and your community's journey. Center the voices and experience of First Nations and Métis people and learn from them, respect them, build reciprocal relationships and nurture them. We're so used to as First Nations people, like this extractive kind of exploitive relationships that come from, academia, resource extraction. This has been our experience since colonization. So we're naturally very guarded and we protect ourselves. So you're going to encounter that, understand that, respect that. But, if it's a reciprocal relationship, you're going to build trust over time. And that's really the key to building those relationships in a good way. Organizationally, invest in learning. Personally, invest in learning. You can see the amount of investment that SaskCulture has invested in staff and board and with our network. It's really super important, and there's no end date. Like, continue to learn. Don't get discouraged. Learn from your mistakes. We've had so many setbacks in our work, and we have to get back up. You have to dust yourself off. You have to learn from those mistakes, and continue to move forward. You got to be brave. Small steps small steps will still move you forward. Be bold. This journey is not for the faint of heart. I recognize that there's a lot of people are uncomfortable approaching, First Nations Métis people. We can, like I said, we don't have a lot of trust. Our experiences have done that. But even as a First Nations person, I have been called out and reprimanded by my elders, by our knowledge keepers. And I don't take that personally. I take that to heart and I learn from it. And I try to build it into how I go forward. The same is going to happen to you. Don't get discouraged. And remember, this is a shared journey, and moving forward in a good way is only going to happen when we walk together with respect and sharing and understanding. And lastly, keep practicing. They say practice makes perfect. I'm not going to say that in this case because there's just, it took over 150 years for us to get to this point as a country. It's going to take as long to get us to a point where we can, finally be at a place where we are equals in all the indicators, the health indicators, the economic indicators, it's going to take a long time. So keep practicing and share those lessons with the people in your world, in your circles. And this isn't going to be accomplished in our lifetimes, but we can definitely make a difference. So as we say in the Cree culture, when we're done talking, ekose, means that's it. I'm not going to say anymore. And I will say thank you, or Kinanaska Kumitin, to you all for hearing me out today. That is it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shelley, for what I knew was going to be like very heartfelt and inspiring comments. Does anyone have any questions directly for Shelley before we kind of go into some breakout rooms to just reflect and share with each other on where we're at and, you know, some of the struggles that we might be finding in our own journeys? Don't be shy. We'll bring you back after you've had a chance to kind of reflect in your group. So if you do have questions, Shelley and we'll be back for the last kind of 10 minutes or so of the session. So if you do come up with questions, feel free to bring them up then if you're still pondering things right now. So Colleen, I think yeah, there we go. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you all had an opportunity to have some really great discussions in your little, somewhat smaller kind of groups. Does anyone want to share with us some of your reflections after your conversations?
Well, nobody's stepping up, so I'm just gonna jump in here. I was fortunate to be in a group with Shelley, which was lovely. It was good to hear expand a little more and talk a little more about her experience. And we all had a chance as well to contribute, except for Brittany, who unfortunately got cut off near the end in her middle. But I think in our group, we all understand the importance of reconciliation. I think what I'm finding that I want to hear more from the public is we're all on the path to reconciliation. It's whether or not we choose to participate and how we participate. And that's how I like to speak about it. I'm not originally from Saskatchewan, I'm originally from Ontario. And I would say my education about Indigenous people in Canada was very romantic. And then coming to Saskatchewan was a huge shock with the just amount of disrespect that is put towards the original people of this land. It really breaks my heart all the time. So I work hard to counteract that kind of dialogue. And I think we all need to do the same, especially if we're non-Indigenous, because that's where the change is going to happen. Almost every person I met who's Indigenous, whether it's Métis First Nation or Innu, understands where they're based from because they lived that, or the families have lived it and they're continuing to live it. But people who have been outside that experience, non-Indigenous people, we need to keep educating ourselves and others so we all understand the horrors that people who originated on this land went through and how that's what reconciliation to me is about. So thank you so much, Shelley, and thank you to everybody who showed up today to talk about this important issue. We'll just continue on doing what we're doing, and it is slowly making a difference. I can see I've been in Saskatchewan now 25 years, and I've definitely seen some progress in my time. Also some backsliding, but you know, we just have to keep working at it. And I think working together is the most important factor. And thank you. I'll shut up now.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kimberly. Terry, I see you kind of put your camera on. Did you have something you'd like to reflect on?
Well, I just thought I'd add the fact that Robin Kimmerer Wall Grading Sweetgrass. It's an awesome, awesome book. It's something that everybody should experience. Grading Sweetgrass. It's at the library if you don't want to purchase it.
And we have digital copies too. If you can't make it down to the library, use your card to sign on to Libby and you can read it digitally as well.
And I will echo Terry's recommendation. It's a beautiful, beautiful book to read.
Anybody else want to share? Judith, as one of the few students that came today, do you want to share a little bit about what people in your group had to say?
Oh, okay. Yeah, we just spoke. Everyone was like knowledgeable about the TRC, and we spoke about how it's an ongoing process for reconciliation. And Dr. Jane made a really important point on how it's not about like sharing or the TRC or sharing like calls to action, but we have to make sure we're sharing the right thing, right? Because like people might have an idea of what the TRC is, and they're sharing like it in a way to kind of like for their own agenda, not for like the main purpose of the TRC. And someone else shared a really important point that education got us into this mess, and education is going to take us out of this mess. So we just have to be knowledgeable and try to share the calls to action, because in different sectors, because the TRC has different sectors: health, sports, youth. So whatever place we find ourselves, just try to be respectful and aim for reconciliation.
Thank you for that summary, Judith. I love your comment about how education is what's the key to the future, and that certainly is something that I have to remind myself of regularly when I understand how extremely privileged I am to have. I come from the town where Clolton Boushie was shot. Gerald Stanley is a member of that community. And I have to remind myself on a very regular basis just how privileged I am that I had the opportunity to move out of that town and go to university and have the good fortune to work with wonderful people like Shelley to educate, who, you know, just by becoming friends with people like Shelley to learn, you know, some of these truths that certainly if I was still there, I'd be feeling the same way as some of these people, right? And again, it's that education piece. Cameron or Tanya, I see you kind of have your cameras on. Did you have anything that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, it's really wonderful to attending these sessions. It's, as a new student, it's an eye-opening experience, I must say. Coming from a different cultural and historical background, I really humbled to learn about the devastating impacts of residential schools and all the loss of Indigenous language and cultures, and of course, the ongoing struggles faced by the Indigenous community. So yeah, I personally like to commit myself, like I will educate myself more to learn more about the truth and reconciliations features and all the things we should proceed towards, and engage myself. So with all the events, workshops, and discussions, and also being a graduate student, I will try to align my study towards public policy and administrations, how we can in line the Truth and Reconciliations in the overall process. So thank you, Sally, for the wonderful presentations. It means a lot. Thank you.
Well put, Tanya. I know you've just, a recent newcomer to Saskatchewan, so we welcome you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn and Colleen, for introducing this forum as well. Yeah, I appreciate.
Cameron, I think you're on mute, but
Yeah, I mean, echoing really what everybody else said, I was also in Shelley's breakout room, so felt really lucky to be able to just listen and reflect more. I think like overall, it is really important to remember the point that it is our job now. Once we have to educate ourselves, we have to go out into these spaces and learn for ourselves. And again, I think it's important to echo that it is this powwows or whatever it is. It's a space for everybody to go and learn and to listen and reflect. And I think some people might be worried about that, like they're stepping on toes or whatever, but that's not the case. And we should want to be a part of these. And I gotta say, the powwows are so much fun. And the best time, the spring one, I look forward to every year. So yeah, I think it is really a personal journey and always learning and always reflecting because things are changing all the time. And yeah, we can always learn more.
well, thanks for sharing that, Cameron. I don't know if there's Cameron, I don't know if there's anyone else that wants to reflect. I know since I have started working with Luther College, one thing I feel very blessed about is getting to know Elder Lorna Standing Ready. And she's been helping many of us, you know, in our work with Indigenous communities, but, you know, really just so wise, you know, sharing some of those lessons. And, you know, so that's something that Luther offers is that, you know, if you do have the opportunity to take part in anything that she's involved in, you won't regret it. Every time I meet with her, I learn something new.
I will just add as well. I know we just met with Matt from Reach, actually, Cameron, last week, I think, with Elder Lorna. And so Elder Lorna has a lot of history with nonprofit organizations locally in Regina and area. And so if your organizations or any of the staff from those organizations would like time to connect with Elder Lorna, in the work at Luther College, she has demonstrated that she loves the work with nonprofit organizations. So if you'd ever like to sit and connect sometime, just send me an email and let me know, and we can definitely arrange a time to meet.
I just wanted to share that I attended Project of Heart at Campion College. The 6-week program, and I did it twice. And every time I was about the Regina Indian Industrial School and racism. And the best part was at the end we would smudge. That took away some of the feelings, the horror that we experienced, listening to what people had to deal with, that people had to go through to live. And you know, they still smile. There's always a sense of humor. I could only wish I could come to that level. They won't, you know, we're just here to share. We're not here to capitalize on each other, to make ourselves look better than others. That feeling of actually acceptance is just a beautiful, we're all one. We're all relations.
Thank you for sharing that, Terry. The Project of Heart that Luther has offered, how many years has that been now, Colleen?
I think since 2018, and we offer it every fall. And it's free, it's open to all ages, all community members, students, staff, faculty. So it is ongoing, it's going on right now. But we do offer it every fall semester.
So yeah, I highly recommend that as Terry said, I can't remember which year that I participated in, but I know it was just incredibly rich, important, and just meeting and bonding with the group of people that all came together during that series was something that doesn't leave you. And Terry, I commend you for going more than once, because I do think that part of the beauty of that program is that you learn from all the individuals. It's structured in a way that you're going to learn from each new cohort that comes in into the program. It's just such a good program.
Yeah, it's Luther, not Campion.
Yeah. Yeah, well, no worries. It's one of the federated colleges, and Campion does a lot of really great stuff as well. But I just thought, just in case somebody is looking for it down the road, and I know Colleen will send it out to the network, you know, well in advance of the next fall session, so that anyone who does want to attend, and that's in person too. So like, I mean, we try our best with these Zoom kind of things, but you don't get the same kind of personal connection with people over Zoom. Even though we try our very best, it's still this kind of artificial, weird little, you know, we've got the tic-tac-toe squares at the top, you know, and you know, we can't really get to know each other in that same way. And so that's one of the beautiful things about that particular program. And so if you're serious about your journey towards reconciliation, that is something I think you really would love to attend if you haven't already. And speaking of, you know, we're coming close to the end of our time with each other. Colleen and I are busy trying to plan our next semester's series. So we throw it out to all of you that if you have ideas for topics that you would like us to bring speakers for, please let us know, because we're really always wanting to be responsive to the needs of community. And we know that this particular topic is one that, you know, even though we had a small number, only a small number of people today, that's not a reflection on the importance of the topic. I think it's more a reflection of the fact that it's a stressful time of the year where everybody I meet is like the sky is falling for some reason. It's like students especially, but you know, we're going to be making this recording available on YouTube through Luther's website, and I know we'll get lots of interest there. And please, by all means, we'll be sending you a link afterwards with the recording. Please share it with your friends and colleagues that didn't have the privilege of joining us today. So I'll leave the last word to Shelley, but Shelley, I just want to say, like, I honestly, I feel that you're one of the treasures in my life that I was able to meet kind of early in my career. And yeah, you didn't disappoint. You're wise beyond your years, my friend.
Thank you, Lynn. You know, I really appreciate that we have been able to remain connected after our time together at Casino Regina. And I so appreciate that, you know, your leadership was one of, was really positive to me at that early stage of my career. I can think we both probably recognize the challenges of our workplace of the day. But you know, it means a lot to me that we've been able to maintain our connection through these years, and that you've always been super supportive and humble in, you know, what I've shared with you. You've always listened and taken it to heart, and I appreciate your faith in me and the opportunity to join you here today with everybody. to talk about something that I'm still really honestly finding my footing in. Like I mentioned, some of the stuff we haven't even discussed as a family. You know, my family's in various stages of healing from our experience. But thank you for the opportunity. And I hope that there's something that resonates with everybody and that you can take forward in your own personal journeys. And we'll meet somewhere on the path, somewhere along the way with each of you. I know that. And I look forward to that. Thank you again.
Thanks again, everyone. And like I say, please reach out to me if you have ideas for future workshops, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Bye.